Welcome to Law Syrup, the show where we talk with special guests about hot topics in Canadian law. This podcast is a co-production with the Ontario Justice Education Network, also known as OJEN. I'm your host, Herman Wong. Let's tap in. Before we begin, please know that this show is not intended to be legal advice or a replacement for a legal representative. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Law Syrup. I am so excited to have the show come back, and I'm thrilled to share with you my conversations with some truly amazing guests this year. To kick off our second season, I held a panel discussion on the topic of Gladue Court. What is Gladue Court? What happens there? And how can we learn more about it and other resources that are available to the public? To help explore this topic, joining our panel is Justice André Chamberlain, Jonathan Rudin from Aboriginal Legal Services, Crown Attorney Emma Haydon, and Duty Counsel Lysandra Moreno. Here's what we discussed. Hey everyone, I want to start things off by saying that it's incredible to have everyone that's present here on the episode today to speak about Gladue Courts. And we have a very stacked panel here, so thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy days to share your thoughts and your work within this space. I believe that this topic is one that many people in the public are interested in, and some people might have heard of Gladue Court, but might not know exactly what it entails or what the process is like compared to other court settings. So I think today's episode is going to be a really engaging one. Before we get started, how about we all go around and we tell each other who we are, where we work, and what your position is. So Justice Chamberlain, how about we start with you first?
Sure, thank you. And thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be here. My name is André Chamberlain. I'm a judge of the Ontario Court of Justice. I've been a judge. I was appointed in 2019. Before that, I was a federal crown, and I've been involved with the Gladue Court, I think, since about 2003, I think, or so. I am also a member of the Innu community from Mashtouietch in Quebec. My mother was a residential school survivor, and I am a 60 scoop kid. So that's kind of what I bring, and I happen to be the lead for the Gladue Court in Toronto at the Ontario Court of Justice here at 10 Herman.
Emma, how about you?
Thanks, Herman. Thanks as well for having me be part of this podcast and this panel. It's a real honor. I'm an assistant Crown attorney in Toronto. I've been a Crown for 15 years. I've done all of my practice in Toronto. Before we moved to our new courthouse at 10 Armory Street, I was mostly at College Park. Well, most of my career has been spent either being the lead Crown for my office at the Gladue Court and also doing a very significant trial work. There was a period of time in 2017 and 2018, I was counsel for the province of Ontario for the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. And so represented the province at the family hearings and other hearings that were part of the national inquiry. Thanks.
Amazing, thank you. And Lysandra, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
And thank you very much, Herman, for having me. So I'm with Duty Counsel. So Duty Counsel provides free legal services to those who are unrepresented. I've been in this position for about 7 months, and before that, I was in private practice as a criminal defense lawyer, where my practice mostly focused on representing Indigenous accused. And now as Duty Counsel, I'm one of the Duty Counsel that staffs the Gladue Court, and I'm also a Métis and Ojibwe.
And last but not least, Jonathan.
So I'm Jonathan Rudin. I'm the Special Projects Director at Aboriginal Legal Services. That's our English name. Our Anishinaabe name is Gakina Gwai Wabama Debwewen, which translates as all those who seek the truth, and that name was given to us by Elder Jackie LaValle. I've been with Aboriginal Legal Services since it started in 1990, so yeah, I've been around for a while.
So before we get started on our main topic, how about we all share what brought us to a career in the legal profession in the first place? So Jonathan, how about we start with you first?
Okay, how long is the podcast?
Take as long as you want. That's fine.
Okay, well, all right. So I'll do the quick version. So I always thought I would want to be a lawyer until I went to law school. And then I went to law school and finished law school and thought I don't want to be a lawyer. I didn't enjoy it. So I took about 10 years off to do community work. I got my master's in law, focusing on the charter. I did a number of projects with regard to Indigenous people in the legal system. And then in 1990, there was a posting for a 1-month job at setting up Aboriginal Legal Services. So I applied and got the job, and it's been a very long month.
And Justice Chamberlain, what brought you to the law?
I was working in mental health for years. In my 20s, I worked in group homes with kids who had psychiatric and emotional difficulties. And then I worked an outpatient treatment center for kids who were dealing with addictions and addiction issues in their families. I moved to Toronto, worked at a place called the Gerstein Center, which is a psychiatric crisis intervention center, and then was a little burnt out and tired and decided to go back to school because I hadn't finished my undergrad degree. And so I went back, but at the end of it, I was kind of like, well, what am I going to do now? I hadn't quite finished my undergrad. I'm still a half credit short of getting my BA. But I found out I could apply to some law schools, and I got into Osgoode. So it was really kind of a spur thing. I was like, I've often thought about being a lawyer. I didn't talk to anybody about it because I suspect if I had, I might not be here now. But I got into law school and then found myself with a federal crown eventually to doing some work with family law for a little bit, and then as a prosecutor.
And Emma, how about you?
So funny enough, I have a lot of similarities to Justice Chamberlain's background. I didn't think that I ever wanted to be a lawyer. I worked in public health area, although not so much service provision like His Honor did, more the research area. And so doing research and policy largely in the area of harm reduction, safe injection kits, safe consumption sites, that kind of thing, heroin prescription. I worked at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health for a number of years and did a master's in public health. And then the time came where I needed to think of a next step. And the next step was either do a PhD or go to law school. And so I decided to go to law school. My plan always from the beginning was to go into criminal law and to be a crown. When I had done my research in my master's in public health, I saw the intersections of people dealing with mental health and substance use and in being involved in the criminal justice system and everything else that we call, the social determinants of health. That's what we talked about in research. And so that's always what I wanted to do. But it was also a little bit of a weird fluke. I kind of just decided to apply one time and here we are.
And last but not least, Lysandra, what brought you to the law?
So it stemmed from my Indigenous background. When I went into undergrad, I didn't know what I wanted to do or what I wanted to study, but I just knew I wanted something that would kind of contextualize my experiences as an Indigenous person. And I had quite a few family members who were in and out of the system. So that led me to taking criminology, where I really started to learn about the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in prison. And it just became a topic that was very passionate to me. I knew that I wanted to do some kind of work where I could work directly with Indigenous people and make impact and change on a personal level, like a daily kind of change, in addition to bigger changes. And then from there, I just kind of found my way into law and just felt that getting into the defense side of things was the perfect fit for me.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Let's talk about what Gladue Court or Indigenous Peoples Court is in general. So maybe, Jonathan, this is a question for you, but where exactly did the name Gladue come from? And what exactly is Gladue Court?
In Canada, we often tend to name things after cases. And so in 1999, there was a case at the Supreme Court of Canada involving Jamie Tanis Gladue. We pronounce it Gladue. West of Ontario, they pronounce it Gladue. So I'll just say Gladue, although I want to be respectful to her family. And this was a case that interpreted Section 718.2E of the Criminal Code, which was enacted in 1996. And that section says that when sentencing a person, a judge should look for all alternatives to incarceration that are reasonable in the circumstances, with particular attention to the circumstances of Indigenous people. No one knew what that section meant until 1999, and hence the Gladue decision. And that's why so many things related to the sentencing of Indigenous people now come with the word Gladue attached to it.
Would anyone else like to share?
Well, I'll jump in there. I think I would say it's evolved over time. When we started back in 2001, and I've been back, I think I was back in 2001 when I started, as I'm thinking back now, that, we were just in a regular court at Old City Hall. We had, a few judges who were interested in starting this, and any folks who identified as Indigenous would come there. And we had Crowns and Duty Council and federal Crowns and staff from Aboriginal Legal Services who were knowledgeable and wanted to learn about and to do this kind of work. And so we kind of started that way, but then we decided to have operational meetings, monthly and so we started changing how we do things, started changing how we, approach bail, how we approach sentencing. And it's evolved over time to now where we sit in a new courthouse at 10 Armory Street, where we have a courtroom that has a table that is in a circle. We have a courtroom that hides the dais where the judge usually sits and hides the colonial emblems of the crown. And we all sit at the same level at the table. We've changed how we do things. In courts, you'll see, whether if you've been in court, that when the judge comes in, everybody gets up, all rise. There's an introduction, everybody bows to the judge bows back. There's a formal introduction. We've done away with kind of some of those kinds of colonial trappings of the court, because we recognize that Indigenous folks have struggled and have lost a lot of faith in the criminal justice system. And so we wanted to make it more relatable, less intimidating. So there's different things that we've done. We've brought food in because we realized, hunger and food is an issue. We have workers. We now bring in some ceremonies. We do, smudging every morning and offer smudging during the day for folks who wish to smudge with medicine, with sage and whatnot. We have feathers available if folks request them for either ceremony or for oaths. We're very much trying to come to build a relationship, and we have a smaller group of folks involved so that you build relationships with people, get to know them. So it's not just they're coming to court and facing the hammer of the justice system. You start building relationships, getting to know people, and building a bit of trust. So I think that's my view, of how we've changed. I'm sure people have other perspectives as well.
Just on that point that Justice Chamberlain raised about the relationship building, I think that's one of the key parts of what happens in that courtroom. And, we work in the criminal justice system. We always think of it as this highly adversarial system, meaning it's kind of the crown, and then there's the accused person, and the interests are very different, and their positions are going to be very different, and there isn't much communication between the two. I find, as an assistant crown attorney, despite the fact that adversarial system still exists there, relationships are so important because you trust what you're going to learn about someone. Sometimes people are telling you very personal things about their lives too, and you have to honor that trust and honor that respect. And being in that court on a regular basis helps to build those relationships. For instance, I have relationships that I build with duty counsel like Lysandra, and that's really important too, in order for them to be able to feel comfortable sharing information about their clients, for instance. And when we build that relationship, when you build that respect and you honor people in that space, making it a little bit less uncomfortable for people who have had discomfort and pain and trauma in the criminal justice system and outside of it, we're not only making the lives of the people who are coming into that court better. I'm doing my job as a crown, which is, helping ensure public safety, community respect, community safety, and all those things. That's what we're doing in that court, or at least trying to do.
And going back to the history of the Gladue Courts, and maybe Jonathan, this is another question that we can ask you, but when did discussions begin for creating a space like the Gladue Courts?
You mentioned earlier that Gladue was a 1999 case. It was actually argued in November of 1998. And Aboriginal Legal Services was what's called an intervener. We were at the court and we were making arguments in the case. The decision came out in April 1999. It's a remarkable decision. It's pretty easy to read, and it's really, I go back to it every month or two, I read it. And as a lawyer, it was really exciting to get this decision, because this is why I wanted to be a lawyer, to get involved in cases like this. It was all really exciting. But then not much changed. So even though the Supreme Court in Gladue said judges had to sentence people differently, that the overrepresentation of Indigenous people was a crisis, things weren't changing. And so in September of 2000, we were invited to a conference of judges from across the country. And we gave a little presentation about what we did at Aboriginal Legal Services. And one of the people in the room was Justice Patrick Shepherd, who's since passed away. He was a judge at Old City Hall. And at the end of the session, after we talked about how disappointed we were that things weren't happening with Gladue, Justice Shepherd said, "What if we set up a court just to deal with Indigenous people? What do you think of it?" And we said, "Well, we think that's a great idea." And so for the next year, we worked. It was largely Justice Shepherd and some other judges who worked to establish the court. And in the fall of 2001, the Gladue Court opened. It was the first one of its kind in Canada. So it was pretty remarkable.
And what exactly is expected of judges who do appear in Gladue Courts? Because we talked a little bit about the differences from other court settings, but Justice Chamberlain, maybe you can answer that question for us.
The thing we have to remember is that judges are independent, right? Like it's very important that judges, not be influenced by rules and other than the law. We all have to follow the law. But the reality is, I know for me, part of the comfort that I have, and I think why Gladue Court works well, is because of the informality. And, and at times it can be a chaotic place, right? You've got folks, some of whom have a lot of different struggles, including mental health and addictions and poverty and hunger, all kinds of things. And so it can be a bit of a chaotic place. So it has to be somebody who can be calm and can be willing to not stand on formality and be prepared to kind of roll with things as things go along. And it's got to be somebody who really understands the Gladue principles and is really committed, I think, to, reducing and over incarceration, right? I mean, the code is clear that we have to do everything we can to avoid incarceration where appropriate. There are times when I sentence people to further jail, but, I recognize that it should be the last resort for me, the very last resort for me, right? And it sometimes means taking a risk on somebody that you think like, it's not to say that there aren't a risks of further offenses, but how serious is the risk of harm to the community or individuals in the community? I don't expect that people are going to walk out of my court and never commit another offense, right? And I remind myself, for me, that okay, so let's say I have somebody today and my option is, do I sentence them to no time in jail or 6 months in jail? Well, what's going to change if I release them now or in 6 months' time? It's 6 months that the community will not have it. They won't have access to the community and won't be out there, but will anything change in their lives? And so for me, it's how can I make an impact and encourage them to make changes in their lives? And how can I try and put supports in place to help people actually, as Emma was saying, Emma Haydon, the Crown was saying, that will really help folks do the things we want to do, protect the community, make some positive changes in their lives and move forward in a more positive way. I think people self-select in some ways to come to Gladue Court in terms of personality, but it's a challenge because we also sit quite a few days now. So it's an ongoing process that we have to keep people in there. I mean, the judges.
And you spoke about positive change, Justice Chamberlain, and I wanted to ask everybody what your own experience with the Gladue Courts has been like over time. Have people given good feedback about the Gladue Courts? Have there been criticisms? So maybe, Emma, we could start with you with that question if you feel comfortable.
It's an interesting question to answer. So one of the things that we do in the Gladue Court, and this is something that is largely driven in some ways by Crown policy, is diversion. And so when we're talking about, specific change for people and ways that we're kind of building on restorative justice, this is one of the options that is available to Crowns. And there are certain offenses that we can divert. And what that means is that the person goes essentially back into the hands of the Indigenous community. And it's something to address the root causes of their offending, help them provide some stability in different areas of life, help them reconnect with the Indigenous community. And that's our partner in Toronto is through Aboriginal Legal Services. So one of the things that I found in terms of feedback is that Aboriginal Legal Services does a feast, an honoring ceremony for people who have completed the diversion program. In fact, it's happening in a couple of days from now. And I have gone to that in the past, and you'd think, oh, this is the Crown. She's going to this space where it's people who may have been involved in the criminal justice system and Indigenous peoples involved in the criminal justice system. I think it's important I am not Indigenous. I am, in fact, a first-generation Canadian. But going into that space and being able to, again, continue to build and nurture those relationships that have been created. That's been some really wonderful feedback, is to go into that honoring ceremony and see people that I'd only ever seen in court before and see them in a completely different in a different circumstance.
I'm always impressed by, I think, the difference we have in reaction to folks, whether you're sentencing them or the fact that, we really try to connect with folks and not just, lecture them about what they've done wrong and look at their record, but also appreciate their backgrounds and the struggles that they've faced in their lives, and really kind of honor and respect that, as an individual, they've had their struggles, but what brought them here was a lot of the struggles that were imposed upon them by their circumstances, and by racism and by colonialism and by the Indian residential school programs that have devastated families and communities. And now we expect folks to come before us and to have everything together. And so, I think when you can respectfully talk about their past and what brought them here, and acknowledge that they have every reason to be angry and they have every reason to feel, the loss that they feel, but that you're encouraging them to find a healthier way to deal with it, you see the eyes light up a little differently. And we have a lot of folks who struggle with drug addiction. And right now, we've had the scourge of fentanyl on our streets, where folks are dying from fentanyl overdoses. I keep an naloxone kit on my desk with me. And, when I hear that folks have used fentanyl and they've been in custody, I tell them, I say, right now that you haven't used because you've been in custody for a period of time is when you're at the highest risk for an overdose. And so I hold up my naloxone kit and I say, I want you to be safe. I have seen too many names of people who we've lost in our community because of addictions, and I want you to be safe. Be around people. Get a naloxone kit. Go to safe injection sites. I'm not saying I know you're going to use, and I know you told me you want to make changes, but if you don't, please be safe. And there's a difference in how people react, and you can tell that it's they sense that you're not just there to impose your sentence, but you're also saying, I mean that I want you to make some changes and I care about where you're going from here. And so to me, I think that those kinds of impacts, and to be honest, I've felt it coming back, that at times when I've been away, I've come back and people are like, we miss you. Where have you been? And it's so that relationship that you build, it's a community that we're building in a way, because folks in some ways have lost the connection to their community, and we're trying to build that community in the court. And I think that's one of the things we do well. And I see it and feel it. I mean, it's anecdotal. I don't know, but my sense is that we get that a lot more. And I think in our courts than I would in other courts where I've seen.
That's amazing. And I was wondering, for Jonathan and Lysandra, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I can say from a client perspective, it's very often that the duty counsel lawyers, will be speaking with clients and, they talk about how much they like Gladue Court or they want to go there. When they're in custody, they get the option if they want to appear in court by video or in person. And it's very common that they'll actually say they want to come in person because they like the space. Some of them actually feel safe there. They feel safe to open up about what they're struggling with, whether it's directly in custody, what they're facing, or, just kind of in general with their life. And they also enjoy being able to just sit in a circle with everyone, just having some general conversation. They get some snacks. So for them, it's really the highlight of their week. And we can tell that it makes such a big difference for their overall well-being. And it just gives them something to look forward to because, this is obviously a very low point in their life. They're dealing with a lot of different things. So when they feel that they can get support from anywhere, from different people, especially different positions in the criminal justice system, it definitely makes a really big difference to them.
And Jonathan, last but not least, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's important to know that courts have historically been sites of injustice for Indigenous people. They're not been a place that people want to go. It's a place that people were taken to. There's a history of wrongful convictions of Indigenous people, racism. I mean, courts are not pleasant places. And they're hard for everyone if you're charged. Let's not make it sound like it's wonderful. But if you're Indigenous, it's really hard. And one of the things that we've seen since the Gladue Court started in its very earliest stages, when it was set up just like any other court, but it was just run a bit differently. To pick up on Lysandra's point, clients felt a sense of, I'm being listened to here. When someone's being sentenced, the judge is required to say, do you have anything you want to say? Judges have to say that. And often clients will just say nothing. They won't say anything, or their lawyers sometimes will tell them, don't say anything, just get this over with. In Gladue Court, since it started, that was a very serious question. And people were listened to. And people talk about the fact that they felt listened to and they felt heard. We've just finished an evaluation of the new Gladue Court, which will be coming out officially very soon. And the clients speak about the fact that it's unlike other places they've been. The Gladue Courts are not restoring the faith of Indigenous people in the legal system. That would be way too much. What they're doing is they're creating a space within a system that has historically not been welcoming and not been kind and not been fair. It's changed that balance so people can go into that room on that day and feel better.
You know, throughout all of your answers today, we've mentioned things like a welcoming space, community, and feeling heard. And just jumping off from Jonathan's last answer, in your opinion, what is the connection between our justice system today and the concept of reconciliation? And I know this might be a very big question, but I was wanting to hear all of your thoughts on that, if anyone would like to go first.
Listen, I tell folks all the time that, we're doing what we can to try and make it a more welcoming and a better place for folks to come through, given that they don't have a choice, they have to be there. So as Jonathan said, we're trying to make it a better space and a better experience for them. But I don't kid myself, right? The reality is that, I'm not imposing Indigenous law or using Indigenous traditions or Indigenous culture. This is still the criminal code. It's still colonial law that I'm imposing. And that's the tool that I have, unfortunately, right? The Supreme Court told us do it differently. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission has given us recommendations on what we can do to deal with the reconciliation. But I haven't been given any new tools. I still have the code, and that's what I have to impose. And the arguments I hear are still about denunciation, deterrence, and separation from the community, and we're not using Indigenous law, Indigenous tradition. So I think we have a long way to go as a society, but that's out of my hands. So I think what we do as part of my journey to reconciliation is create a space in our world here in Toronto in the Gladue Courts to make it a better space for people to have a different experience with the criminal justice system.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Justice Chamberlain. A lot of what this podcast is for is to help people take a first step to learn about these concepts and these places that exist. And now I actually want to talk a little bit more about the new Toronto Courthouse, which is downtown. And we all mentioned that it's at 10 Armory Street. And I actually had the pleasure of attending one time for a tour, and it's a really lovely building, and there's a lot there for people to see. So I definitely encourage people to go. Just as a general sense, what is different about the new Toronto Courthouse? And what is different from other courthouses that we might see in Toronto or elsewhere in Ontario?
Jonathan's going to tell you about the Indigenous Learning Center, because that's something that's different at the 10 Armory Street Courthouse location.
So the Indigenous Learning Center is on the first floor of the new Toronto Courthouse, and within it, it contains the Grandmother Buffalo Lodge, which is a round lodge room which has ventilation, so it allows people to smudge, burn sacred medicines. And it's got artwork, it's got sacred pieces, and the space is used for all sorts of things. We encourage people who want to learn about Indigenous laws or traditions, they can get in touch with Aboriginal Legal Services and we can set up training sessions. A lot of organizations come into the lodge to do training. The Ministry of the Attorney General does training there. Justice Chamberlain spoke about ceremonies. We do a lot of ceremonies in the lodge. We have speakers that come to the lodge. It's a really exciting place. We're just revitalizing our outreach and publicity, so we're going to have stuff online about what's going on. I know that this podcast is sponsored by OJEN, and we're working with OJEN to get more students and more teachers involved with it. So it's a chance for people to learn about Indigenous people and the legal system in a place that's other than a courtroom. And it makes sense in some ways because a lot of school trips, let's go to court. And so the school comes and people get off the bus and they run upstairs and they go to court and they go, oh, I saw this case. I said, oh, they was charged with this. And this is a chance to see another part of the system. And so we're very proud of the lodge, and we just opened this summer, last summer 2024, but it's already been really busy and really used, and we're very excited about where it might be going.
I guess my final question is, we've talked about Gladue Court and the Indigenous Learning Center, but what are your final thoughts on what these spaces mean for people?
So I think it's really important. Again, it goes back to the clients, the Indigenous accused, because when we look at the ones that are coming before the court, especially the ones who are repeatedly going before the court, they've had some very, very difficult and very traumatic background experiences. They've experienced some sort of victimization in their life. And again, this goes back to the history of colonization, the 60s scoop, residential school. So there's something that's happened to them that's led them to go down a path that isn't so great. And a lot of the times it's not because they want to, it's because it's a product of their circumstances. And the really great part about Gladue Court is because there is this focus on restorative justice, it's a court that doesn't solely focus on punishing offenders. So it looks at how can we involve the community? How can we connect them with different organizations like Aboriginal Legal Services? How can we address the root cause of why they're coming before the court? And it gives these clients a sense of hope. It helps them to connect with people and organizations that they may not have been aware of before coming to court, or they may not have even had the capabilities of being able to do that. If they didn't have a phone, they don't have internet access to find out what those resources are. So it really does create this holistic outlook for them, and it really gives them something to kind of hold on to have some hope and to understand that the court in itself is aware of what they've experienced. It's being taken into consideration. And while, of course, that does have to be balanced with different principles and, at the same time, public safety, there is a level that will make sure that we can do what we can for them to get the help that they need.
I'd like to we've talked a lot, obviously, about accused people because that's an important part and talking about offenders and talking about the people who are coming in charge before the court. But in these spaces where we have these Indigenous supports, where we have these resources like the feather, like the ability to smudge, like workers who are there, elders, those kinds of things, for me as a Crown, those are really important as well for witnesses and victims or complainants of offenses too. And so, obviously the criminal code talks about sentencing in 718.2E. There are sentencing principles that relate specifically to Indigenous victims as well. And victims deserve to have those supports in the courtroom space because Indigenous victims and Indigenous witnesses have gone through those same histories that Indigenous accused people have had. And so those are also they're troubling and uncomfortable and traumatic spaces for witnesses and victims to be in as well. And I found that, one of the things that we're doing in terms of building the relationships with accused people who are coming before the court is we're also building those relationships with the people who may be victims of crime. And one of the things that we do as well in the courtroom is sentencing circles. And Lysandra kind of talked a little bit about, doing these sentencing principles and sentencing approaches that look at people more holistically and deal with the roots of offending. When we are in a sentencing circle, sometimes you will have victims of crime who are participating in the sentencing circle and dealing very, in that very micro environment of that one relationship with that one person in that circle, talking about, restoring the balance in that relationship and restoring respect for that person who's there.
Can I just jump in for the other thing I would just add is that I think, we often think of reconciliation in terms of what can we change and what can we do to make it a better space for people. And I think, one of the things I said in my swearing in ceremony from my experience in Gladue Court and what we did, the work that we did in Gladue Court, I think we have a lot more to bring and to teach the criminal justice system. And I think that there are a lot of lessons there that can be learned. I can tell you that as a judge, I'm a different judge in other courts than I am because of the work that I've done in the Gladue Court. How I approach other cases has changed because of the work that I've done in Gladue Court. And so I think there are learnings and teachings and gifts there that we bring to the criminal justice system that aren't, I think, yet appreciated yet. I think we're getting there. We're starting to learn. We're starting to see it. But I think there's it's a movement and a change that I think is really big and really significant that I don't think everybody's caught on yet. But as we get more converts to what we're doing, I think we're seeing some of that spreading. And I think, we can change the system and make it a better place for the work that we're trying to do.
I want to get back again because I keep saying I read this case back to the Gladue case. And I think one of the things that the Supreme Court said is that the overrepresentation, the mass incarceration of Indigenous people is a crisis in the Canadian criminal justice system. And what's significant about that is the crisis is not that Indigenous people commit crime. Lots of people commit crime. The crisis is the way that the legal system has responded to Indigenous people who commit crime is to disproportionately put people in jail. And the legal system, the criminal legal system itself, is a source of discrimination towards Indigenous people. And that's not just, it is my feeling, but it's also the feeling of the Supreme Court. They've said that on a number of occasions. And so what this court tries to do, we're not doing favors. It's not like, oh, we're doing something special for Indigenous people. What we're trying to do is remedy the damage that has been done. When the TRC, in their 94 calls to action, they divide them into two parts. One is legacy. How do we do with the legacy of residential schools? And then reconciliation. Reconciliation happens after legacy. All the justice recommendations are in the legacy part. We have to fix the harm that was done from the legal system. Ultimately, it's Aboriginal Legal Services position that where we eventually want to get to is distinct, discrete Indigenous justice systems. That's the answer. But we're not there yet, and we're not going to be there tomorrow. We're not going to be there next month or next year. It's going to take a while. And in the meantime, there are many people, many Indigenous people who are caught up in this system, and we have to do what we can to make that experience a better one and better for them so that we create safer communities and we don't perpetuate the discrimination that too often people have been subject to.
That's another amazing answer. And I want to thank everybody for being so open and candid with your answers today. I did have one extra question that came to the top of my mind before we end off here. And this one is for our listeners, especially for young people who might be interested in a career in law or in advocacy. So I was wondering, what's the best piece of advice you can give them if they are passionate about issues like Indigenous people's rights or other social community issues that might be present in Canada?
Follow your heart, find some mentors, find people to work with who are doing their good work, help them out, see what they need, listen to what it is that they need and they want from me.
Yeah, I would say try and get some teachings. So the things that have been most impactful and meaningful to me was, and still are meaningful to me, is spending time with elders and traditional teachers. And you can do that anywhere. Wherever you are, there will be teachers. So that's one thing that I think is really important, because you'll understand that Indigenous culture has more answers they have to more complex questions. So that's one thing. And the second thing is, if you're interested in justice, maybe law, there are other ways that you can achieve justice. So don't feel that you only have to think about law. I mean, Justice Chamberlain and Emma talked about the work that they did in other areas before they came to law, and those are also about creating a just world. So if those things matter to you, find something that works for you, that you're passionate about, and you can probably find ways to turn that into something that's going to be relevant to justice. And if you're interested in Indigenous people, justice for Indigenous people.
Amazing. How about you, Emma?
So I'm going to assume that the students who are listening to this podcast are in many different places across Ontario. We're obviously, all of us, coming to you from Toronto, and we have a very specific, Indigenous community, an urban Indigenous community of people who come from many different places across Turtle Island. But it may be that your listeners are people who live on or close to reserve communities. Learn about your reserve community that's near you. Sometimes you may be able to access the Friendship Center. Those are places where you could start making these connections and hopefully participate in ceremony. I will echo what Jonathan said. Participating in things like sweats have been one of the most impactful and incredible things for me working in this area, to be able to kind of work through and process and understand the teachings in a very deeply personal way for me. And then I carry that forward with me in my practice.
Last but not least, Lysandra, how about you?
My advice would also be to get involved with community organizations, to do the volunteer work, because it makes such a significant difference to you as a person, to help you grow as a person, to help you learn, to help you figure out what you want to do, what you're passionate about. But it also gives you an opportunity to learn right from the people who directly work with the individuals that need the help the most. And you learn so much from them. And those are the experiences that I hold very close to my heart as I was growing up and thinking about going into law school. They made a really big impact on me, and they also taught me skills that I use every day now being a duty counsel lawyer. And I wouldn't be able to be where I am today or provide the level of service I can to my clients without having that experience.
And that's all really good advice. And I want to thank you all once again for being a part of today's episode. To Justice Chamberlain, Jonathan, Lysandra, Emma, thank you so much for being so open and candid with your answers. And I do think and I hope that listeners who do listen to this episode will be inspired to learn more, not just about Gladue Court, but also about issues surrounding restorative justice, other support systems that are in place, and organizations like Aboriginal Legal Services. So apart from that, thank you so much once again for joining me here today. It's been a great one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Herman. It was fun.
Thank you for tapping into this episode of Law Syrup. On the next episode, we take a look at the Ontario rental market with Douglas Kwan from the Advocacy Centre for Tenants Ontario. Law Syrup is produced by me, Herman Wong, and the Ontario Justice Education Network. For more information and for accompanying resources, check out ojen.ca and our show notes. See you next time.